In 1987, a man walked into a basement shop in Prague and asked to see the mirrors. The dealer, an elderly woman named Irina Volkov, didn't ask which mirrors. She just nodded, locked the front door, and led him to a room most customers never saw. 3 hours later, he walked out carrying nothing. His hands were shaking. When police found him 2 days later, he was sitting in his hotel room staring at a wall, repeating the same phrase over and over. "I saw what I used to be." Irina Volkov ran that shop for 43 years. She claimed to possess the last authentic collection of pre-flood bronze mirrors, artifacts she said came from a civilization that existed before the reset. And according to 17 documented cases, every person who looked into those mirrors after dark saw something that changed them forever. If you're interested in stories that challenge what we think we know about history, hit subscribe. I cover suppressed artifacts, architectural anomalies, and the evidence mainstream historians ignore every week. Now let's talk about what made these mirrors different. Irina's shop, tucked beneath a bookstore on Karlova Street, looked like any other antique dealer from the outside. Dusty furniture, old paintings, the usual clutter of forgotten objects. But Irina had a reputation in certain circles. Collectors of pre-reset artifacts, researchers of old-world technology, people searching for objects that didn't fit the official timeline. They all knew about the basement room. She was born in 1911 in St. Petersburg, before it became Leningrad. Her grandfather had been a curator at the Hermitage Museum, one of the men who catalogued artifacts that later disappeared from official records. When the Bolsheviks took power, he smuggled 12 bronze mirrors out of Russia, hiding them in crates labelled as farming equipment. Irina inherited those mirrors in 1944, along with a journal that documented their origin. According to her grandfather's notes, the mirrors weren't made by any known civilization. They predated the flood, the reset event that erased the old world and rebuilt it as the one we recognize today. The bronze contained trace elements that didn't match any known alloy. The craftsmanship showed techniques that modern metallurgists couldn't replicate. By 1956, Irina had fled to Prague during the Hungarian uprising. She opened the antique shop as a front, but her real business was showing the mirrors to people who asked the right questions. She never advertised, she never sold them, she just showed them. And people kept coming back asking to see them again. The mirrors themselves were unremarkable during daylight. About 18 inches in diameter, dark bronze surfaces that reflected images with surprising clarity, despite their age. No engravings, no decorative elements, just smooth, polished metal that seemed to absorb light, rather than bounce it back. Irina kept them wrapped in black cloth, stored in a temperature-controlled vault behind a false wall. She would only bring them out after sunset. She had one rule that never changed. You could look into the mirror, but only in candlelight, and only alone. The first documented case came in 1959. A university professor named Karol Novotny visited the shop after hearing rumours from a colleague. He was researching architectural anomalies in pre-19th century buildings, trying to prove that construction techniques existed in the past that surpassed what we have today. Irina showed him the mirror at 9 o'clock at night. Karol wrote about the experience in a letter to his colleague, a letter that surfaced decades later when his estate was being sorted. He described seeing his reflection, but wrong. He was wearing clothes he'd never owned, standing in a room he'd never been in. The architecture behind him was massive, precise, built from stones that fit together without mortar. He said he could feel the knowledge in that reflection, like his reflection knew things he'd forgotten. Construction mathematics, geometric principles, and understanding of acoustics and energy flow through buildings that made modern engineering look primitive. When he stepped away from the mirror, the knowledge faded, but the feeling didn't. He spent the next 20 years trying to reconstruct what he'd seen, filling notebooks with sketches and calculations that he claimed came from that single glimpse. Then there was Margaret Eisner in 1973, an American journalist investigating stories of advanced pre-flood civilizations. She tracked Irina down through a network of researchers who shared information off the official channels. Margaret was skeptical. She thought the mirrors were just well-crafted antiques. that the stories were exaggerations from people who wanted to believe in lost worlds. Irina showed her anyway. Margaret saw herself in the mirror, but decades older. She was standing in front of a massive structure made of white stone, teaching a group of people about star positions and their relationship to building alignments. She understood, in that moment, a complete system of architecture based on celestial mechanics, not astrology, actual mathematical relationships between planetary positions and structural resonance. She wrote about it in her journal, which her daughter later published. Margaret said the reflection felt like a memory, not a vision, like she was remembering something she'd done, not seeing something that might happen. When she asked Irina what it meant, the old woman just said, "You're seeing what the reset took from you." The most disturbing case happened in 1981. A man named Thomas Arnett, a military intelligence officer from London, visited the shop on orders from his superiors. British intelligence had been collecting reports about artifacts that didn't fit historical timelines. The mirrors were on their list. Thomas went into the room alone. Irina waited outside. After 30 minutes, she heard him screaming. She opened the door and found him on the floor, hands over his face, the mirror lying shattered beside him. He'd apparently thrown it against the wall. Thomas never filed an official report. He took early retirement 6 months later and moved to a remote cottage in Scotland. But he told his story to a researcher named David Patterson in 1994, 3 years before Thomas died of a heart attack. Thomas said he saw himself in the mirror, but it wasn't him. It was what he called the original version. He was standing in a city that he recognized as London, but it wasn't the London he knew. The buildings were enormous, mathematically precise, built from materials that seemed to generate their own light. The streets were laid out in patterns that created harmonic resonance when people walked through them, and he understood completely how to build those structures, how to cut stone with sound frequency, how to align buildings to channel atmospheric energy, how to create structures that would stand for thousands of years without deterioration. He said the knowledge was overwhelming, like trying to download an entire library into his brain in 30 seconds. But what terrified him was the feeling that came with it, the certainty that this wasn't fantasy, this wasn't imagination, this was memory. He couldn't handle it, so he destroyed the mirror. Irina never replaced that one. She told people afterward that she only had 11 mirrors left, and she became more selective about who she allowed to see them. The pattern across all 17 documented cases was consistent. People saw themselves, but in a different context, usually in settings that suggested an advanced civilization with construction capabilities beyond our current understanding. They came away with fragmentary knowledge, skills they couldn't fully access, but knew existed somewhere in their consciousness. Most of them spent years trying to reconstruct what they'd seen. Some became obsessed, a few went mad. There was another case in 1977. A structural engineer named Sarah Brennan came to Prague specifically to see the mirrors after hearing about them through researchers investigating anomalous architecture. She looked into the mirror for less than 5 minutes. When she came out, she immediately started sketching architectural plans for a building system that used geometric resonance to reinforce structures without internal support beams. The sketches showed construction methods that didn't exist in any engineering textbook. Sarah said she understood how pre-flood civilizations built structures that lasted thousands of years, while ours deteriorate after decades. She spent 6 years testing her theories. Everything worked. The mathematics were sound. But when she tried to publish, every journal rejected her. By 1983, she destroyed her research and never spoke about the mirrors again. Irina's explanation was always the same. The mirrors don't show the future. They show what was taken. The reset event, the flood, whatever catastrophe erased the old world, it didn't just destroy buildings and erase records. It erased knowledge, skills that took centuries to develop, understandings of natural principles that we're still trying to rediscover. And according to Irina, some people carry that knowledge in their bloodlines. Genetic memory, locked away, inaccessible under normal circumstances. The mirrors somehow activated it. They showed people not who they could become, but who they used to be before the reset. In 1991, the shop was raided, not by police, by men in unmarked vehicles who arrived at 3 a.m, cleared out the basement and disappeared. Irina was found 3 days later in a hospital, suffering from what doctors called a severe stroke. She couldn't speak, couldn't write, couldn't communicate what had happened. The mirrors were gone. The vault was empty. The false wall had been torn apart. Irina died in 1994 without recovering her ability to speak. The shop was sold, renovated, and turned into a tourist cafe. No one knows what happened to the remaining 11 mirrors. No records exist of the raid. But here's where it gets interesting. In 2003, a bronze mirror matching the exact specifications of Irina's collection appeared in a private auction in Geneva. It sold for an undisclosed amount to an anonymous buyer. 3 more surfaced between 2005 and 2011, all sold privately. And in 2015, a researcher named Elena Kovacs published a paper documenting similar mirrors in private collections across Eastern Europe. Different dealers, different cities, but the same story. Mirrors that showed people something after dark. Elena tried to trace the origins. She found references in catalogues from the Hermitage Museum dating back to the 1890s, references to pre-dynastic bronze artifacts of unknown origin that were removed from public display in 1917. The trail went cold after that. But Elena's research suggested something that challenges everything we think we know. These mirrors weren't religious artifacts. They weren't decorative objects. They were tools designed to activate knowledge that humans used to possess. The official explanation is that these stories are fantasy, that bronze mirrors are just ancient objects that superstitious people attached supernatural properties to, that Irina Volkov was a con artist. But that doesn't explain why 17 people across 3 decades described almost identical experiences. It doesn't explain why British intelligence investigated. It doesn't explain why the shop was raided by people who left no trail. And it doesn't explain what happened to those 11 mirrors. Today, collectors in certain circles still search for them. There are rumours that some of them are being held in private vaults, shown only to select individuals who are being evaluated for something. What that something is, no one will say publicly, but the people who've seen them recently, the ones who talk about it in encrypted forums and invite-only conferences, they all say the same thing. The mirrors are more active now than they were in Irina's time. Like whatever frequency they operate on is getting stronger. Like the reset is starting to wear off, and the knowledge it suppressed is beginning to leak back through. One account from 2018 surfaced on an encrypted forum. A user claimed to have been shown one of the mirrors in a private collection in Vienna. The experience was different. Instead of seeing themselves in an advanced civilization, they saw multiple timelines simultaneously, versions of themselves in different eras, all connected to the same core knowledge, like watching 100 lifetimes flash by in seconds, each carrying fragments of the same lost understanding. The collection owner explained that the mirrors were never meant to be used individually. They were part of a larger system. 12 mirrors working together, creating a network that could restore complete knowledge sets rather than just fragments. The post ended with a warning. Certain organizations were actively searching for all 12 mirrors to reassemble the system, not to preserve knowledge, but to ensure it stayed buried. The account was deleted within hours. Irina Volkov spent 43 years as the keeper of objects that shouldn't exist according to mainstream history, objects that showed people a past we're not supposed to remember. And the fact that those objects are still out there, still being shown to people in secret, still producing the same terrifying effects, suggests that maybe the past isn't as dead as we've been told. Maybe it's just waiting for the right moment to come back. Whether you believe Irina's mirrors showed genetic memory, parallel timelines, or elaborate hallucinations doesn't really matter. What matters is that the establishment went to considerable effort to take them away from her, and they went to even more effort to make sure no one could trace where those mirrors ended up. That level of suppression only happens when something threatens a carefully maintained narrative, and the narrative we've been given about human history, about the capabilities of past civilizations, about what was lost in floods and resets and convenient fires that destroyed records, that narrative has cracks in it. The mirrors were just one of those cracks. And Irina Volkov was the last person willing to let ordinary people look through it. If you want to see how other suppressed artifacts challenge the official timeline, that video is on screen now. Subscribe for more stories about the history they don't want you to remember.